Ingles.fm, Real English Conversations, Series 1. Podcast 5, Alcohol and Drugs. Alcohol y Drogas. Este podcast contiene una conversación real y sin guión entre dos hablantes nativos de inglés, Mark y Tom. Oirás primero la conversación y a continuación una clase de inglés con explicaciones en español. Cada podcast viene con un workbook detallado que puedes descargar desde nuestra página web, ingles.fm. Incluye una transcripción completa de la conversación, listas de vocabulario, notas culturales y la clase. Recuerda que los miembros de nuestra lista de distribución reciben gratis transcripciones extra de nuestros podcasts, además de muchas otras cosas gratis. Así que no olvides apuntarte al consultar la página. ¡Buena suerte!
Hello, my name's Tom and I'm sitting in Middle Park in Barcelona with Mark. Hi Mark.
Hi Tom.
We're surrounded by lovely pine trees and a few palm trees, and there's a few little green parrots flying around above our heads at the moment, aren't there?
Yes.
And yes, today we're going to talk about alcohol and drugs in society.
Very good.
One of our favourite subjects, I think. Anyway, to introduce it, I'd like to talk a little bit about a statement that a famous university professor, Professor Siegel from the University of California, made. Now he said, intoxication using mind-altering substances, in other words psychoactive drugs, is the fourth drive or human instinct, after hunger, thirst and shelter. Would you agree with that?
I think so, but I'm quite surprised the instinct to reproduce wasn't one of his classified drives.
Yeah, he got that one a bit wrong, didn't he? But the point is that it's a very, very strong human drive, and for thousands of years, and we'll talk about this in a minute, humans have been getting intoxicated on various things. So before we continue and talk a bit more about the history of alcohol and drugs, can we define what we mean by drugs here, please, Mark?
Well, when we refer to drugs, we are talking specifically about recreational drugs. That is, drugs that people take for enjoyment or for fun, so non-medical drugs.
And so some examples would be?
Caffeine, alcohol, cannabis, tobacco, opiates, which is morphine and heroin, cocaine, amphetamines, ecstasy, hallucinogens, tranquilizers, things of that nature.
Okay, thank you. So, looking a bit of the history, let's start with alcohol. How long have people been drinking alcohol? Has there been any evidence found by archaeologists, for example?
Yep, there has. Historians, for example, say that beer preceded bread. That means people have been drinking beer since before they've been making bread. And some Stone Age beer jugs have been found dating from around 10,000 years BC.
My word. So we have been drinking alcohol for thousands and thousands of years. And probably longer than that, but that's just the evidence that they found. Old beer used to be very weak, didn't it? It was like 1% alcohol. And what was the reason that people first started drinking beer, at least in agricultural societies?
In that way, it was a means of purifying the water, because they obviously didn't have modern methods of purification as we do today. So by fermenting the water into a very mild, very weak beer, it was actually a way of cleansing the water, making it safe to drink.
Okay, and in medieval England, they used to give beer rations to sailors and to farmers, didn't they? I think they used to give them like 5 litres of beer a day when they were working in the fields. And
yeah, they needed the hydration, but they weren't in a position to drink clean water, so they had to drink this very weak form of beer as a way of keeping hydrated while they were doing manual work.
But I can't imagine them working very efficiently after 5 litres of beer, even if it is only weak beer. Anyway, drugs. In what ways have humans used drugs through the ages?
There's strong evidence that they have been used for thousands of years again, but mainly in religious rites and practices, and also for medicinal purposes. For example, some drugs can be used to relax the person, painkillers, shamanistic rituals can be used to
cause hallucinations and get in touch with the gods and so on, to communicate, basically.
Yeah, and there's also been evidence found that cannabis has been used as a medicine in China as long ago as 2,800 years BC. So almost 5,000 years in that particular example.
Okay, so we can conclude that drug addiction isn't really a modern phenomenon.
Not at all.
And another interesting little fact, until 1903, Coca-Cola contained 9 milligrams of cocaine per glass. Did you know that?
I thought there was a connection with the name, but I never realized that it was actually true.
And they actually still extract something from coca leaves in America. There's one factory in America that has a license to import coca from, I think, Peru and Bolivia, and they still extract something from it that they use as an ingredient in coca. Anyway, looking more at modern times, let's look at some statistics for Europe and the world and some facts and so on. Do you want to begin?
Yes. We've discovered that 1.8 million people die every year in the world because of alcohol.
That's a huge number. And in the European community, the European community has the highest proportion of drinkers in the world and the highest levels of alcohol consumption per capita.
That wouldn't surprise me, because alcohol is the cause of 10% of all ill health and early death in the European community.
And in terms of figures, there are 200,000 plus alcohol-related deaths in the EU each year in the European community, and 60,000 of those are young people between the ages of 15 and 29.
Looking at the UK, alcohol deaths in the UK are between 10 and 40,000 per year, with the figure for Spain being slightly less.
Yeah, and the 40,000 there are alcohol-related deaths, so they're not direct deaths from alcohol, but people that have had accidents, car crashes, or where it's been a contributing factor.
Exactly.
And looking at the drug-induced deaths in the European community, the UK was top in 2006 with 1,700, and that's compared to Spain with 518 in the same year. So we had a lot more drug-related deaths, but still it's only a fifth or a fraction of the alcohol-related deaths in the UK.
Very small in comparison.
Okay, so looking a little bit more at our drinking habits in Spain and the UK, do we drink about the same?
Yes, it's quite surprising, but it works out to be 11.7 litres of pure alcohol per year per person.
Okay. And in the UK, the annual economic cost of alcohol abuse is a staggering 24 billion euros.
That's an enormous amount.
Yeah, and the World Health Organization says that throughout the world it's usually between 1 and 6% of the GDP, which is the gross economic output of each nation.
Not surprising, because in the UK alone, 17 million work days are lost every year due to hangovers and alcohol-related illnesses.
That doesn't surprise me. I used to miss a few when I worked in London. And in the UK, 1 million people are admitted to hospital emergency departments every year due to alcohol.
May be connected to the final fact, because 40% of violent assaults are caused by alcohol.
In the UK.
In the UK.
So it's obviously a big problem, and it's a big cost on public resources. So can we focus a little bit on the difference in drinking habits, or some cultural observations on the British and Spanish drinking habits? What differences are there?
Well, since living in Spain, I've noticed that wine is a part of more or less every meal. So children grow up seeing adults drinking a glass or 2 glasses of wine with lunch, with dinner, and for them it's just an integral part of the meal. So they never see their parents or their relatives or friends drunk. So there doesn't appear to be an association with wine as a drink that you drink in order to get drunk. Whereas in the UK, most of the drinking culture is about getting drunk.
Yeah, it's what we call a binge drinking culture, and we refer to the Spanish culture as a Mediterranean drinking culture, because it's fairly similar to that in Italy and Greece and places. So in England we buy rounds, we go out, there's pressure to drink as much as your friends that you're with and keep up and buy the same rounds, and everyone ends up drunk. So binge drinking is a huge problem in England, and it's a growing problem in Spain. In England, 24% of men are classified as binge drinkers, which means they drink 5 or more drinks at once, and 8.5% in Spain. So the UK binge drinking culture is 3 times worse than in Spain. But in Spain there's a growing phenomenon, isn't there, recently?
Especially among young people. It's called botellón, and it is more or less a collection of teenagers. Can be a small group of 5 or as big as several thousand, which have been recently. But essentially it's young people drinking in parks, on the street, at fixed locations, maybe in a town square, and drinking normally cartons of wine, sangria, with a view to getting drunk.
Yeah, in England it's become known as a sort of alcopops phenomenon, which are these sweet soda-like alcoholic drinks that they market to young people. Anyway, in Spain, among 15 to 16-year-olds, 23% report being intoxicated in the past 30 days. So that's quite a high percentage, and it's obviously growing. And it's a big problem in terms of female drinking, which is increasing as well, isn't it? Young female drinkers is the big growth area. So I just want to finish this section with your quick thoughts on why binge drinking is, where it originated in the UK, why it originated.
I think it just originated in the pubs, and I believe it had something to do with the old licensing laws. For example, in 1914, during the First World War, the licensing laws were changed to enable pubs to only open between 12 midday and 3 p.m, and then from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. So men, the predominant group who would go to a pub, would be forced back to work in the munitions factories, making guns and armaments for the war effort. So
we've got used to drinking like that through the ages, and it's still with us, isn't it? You know, they ring a bell at pub closing time. Well, they did until recently, and they still do in some places. And you have, you know, until 10:30 or 10:40 to order your last drinks, and then you go to the bar and order about 5, and sit there and drink them in half an hour before you get thrown out onto the street.
So 11:30 at night, there are large numbers of people who are very drunk because they've drunk in huge quantity in a short period of time, going out onto the street with probably nowhere to go except home.
So finally, looking a little bit closer at cannabis and marijuana use, or cannabis or marijuana use rather, did you know that it's a fact that no one has ever died directly from cannabis?
I knew it was impossible to overdose on cannabis.
Yeah, well, it's quite an interesting fact compared to all those hundreds of thousands of people that die every year because of alcohol. Anyway, bearing that in mind, what's one of the theories about why cannabis in particular is illegal around the world?
Well, in the United States it was illegal not to grow hemp, the plant from which cannabis comes, until the 19th century. But then the oil, tobacco,
chemical
companies
corporations
put huge pressure on the politicians to ban cannabis because it was seen as a threat to their business interests, and they created a moral panic. And even going to the 1920s, 1930s, there was a concerted campaign to discredit cannabis, and culminated in a series of films, including the famous one Reefer Madness, that implied that people who smoked cannabis would turn into psychopathic killers. So there was a moral panic to abolish all contact with cannabis, so the oil companies, chemical companies could make huge profits in place of hemp farmers.
Yeah, and looking a little bit closer to present day, the UK has had quite a few changing cannabis laws over the last 10 years. We have a classification system of A, B and C, and cannabis has traditionally been B, classed as a Class B drug, and that means you can get a criminal record for possession of it, even in small quantities. And they've reclassified it to Class C in about 2004, I think, which means that you can't, if you're a student and you get caught with a spliff, you can't end up with a criminal record, which is a sensible thing, because I don't believe people should have criminal records for having a spliff that affects them for the rest of their lives. Anyway, so they made it Class C, then the government commissioned a report by the Royal Society of Arts, and they got all the top psychiatrists, psychologists and doctors together in the country, and they came up with a new classification system, and they said that alcohol was far worse than cannabis, and that basically cannabis should be class C or lower. And what they did, the government ignored the results, fired the chairman of the panel, and reclassified it as class B. So in England now you get a criminal record for possession, or you can do.
That's a ridiculous situation.
And how's that compared to Spain?
In Spain, it's not illegal. More or less, it will be what in the United States they would call a misdemeanor to be caught with a small amount of cannabis. So you may have a fine, or a small fine, you may have the drugs confiscated from you, but you won't get a criminal record, so you won't have this thing following you for the rest of your life. And also in Spain, it's permissible to grow a few plants, cannabis plants at home, if you want to, again for personal use. What happens in the home is protected by the Spanish Constitution.
Which seems like a very sensible state of affairs here, actually. Anyway, to conclude, I think we can probably say that the figures, as the figures suggest, it's wrong to include all drugs together, because obviously heroin is far worse than cannabis, and somebody that perhaps smokes the occasional bit of cannabis isn't the same as a heroin addict at all. And the reality is that alcohol and tobacco do a hell of a lot more damage to society in terms of public health costs and so on than all the other drugs combined. Would you agree?
It seems that the figures bear that out. So, in general, alcohol and tobacco should be moderated.
Okay, thanks for joining us. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Hola, me llamo Rosario y en la clase de inglés de hoy vamos a centrarnos en las costumbres en los pubs de Inglaterra. Cuando Tom hablaba de la cultura de ir al pub en Inglaterra, hizo este comentario.
In England we buy rounds. We go out. There's pressure to drink as much as your friends that you're with and keep up and buy the same rounds. And everyone ends up drunk.
Esto quiere decir que si 6 personas van al pub en grupo, una persona paga una round de 6 bebidas para que todo el mundo tenga algo que beber. Luego, le tocará a otro miembro del grupo pagar las siguientes 6 copas, y así sucesivamente hasta que todos hayan pagado su round. Fijémonos ahora en algunas expresiones en concreto que se utilizan en el pub. Repite las frases en inglés durante las pausas. Cuando llegas al pub, normalmente alguien se ofrece para pagar la primera ronda, diciendo:
I'll get this one. I'll get this one. Or, the first one's on me. The first one's on me.
Al acabar esa ronda, alguien del grupo que ya haya pagado la suya dirá:
Whose round is it? Whose round is it?
En ese momento, alguien del grupo se hará cargo de la siguiente ronda, diciendo:
It's my round. It's my round. Or, I'll get these in. I'll get these in.
A veces, llega un momento en que alguien que ya ha bebido suficiente dice:
I'm gonna sit this round out. I'm gonna sit this round out. Or, I'm gonna duck out of this round. I'm gonna duck out of this round.
Esto quiere decir que no quieren que se les incluya en la siguiente ronda. To sit out o to duck out significa evitar. Por último, recuerda que en Inglaterra, si pides a beer, si no especificas, te van a dar una pinta, a pint, que es 568 mililitros. Con esto te puedes emborrachar mucho más rápido de lo que esperabas. Normalmente, también se pide especificando marca, de modo que, por ejemplo, si quieres pedir una cerveza pequeña en un pub inglés, podrías pedir:
Half a Heineken, please. Or, a bottle of Heineken, please.
Aviso que en algunos pubs en Inglaterra, si un hombre pide media pinta de cerveza, otra gente en el pub puede dudar de su orientación sexual. Por eso, asegúrate de get your round in y pide pints.
Gracias por acompañarnos con este podcast de Inglés.fm. Recuerda que el workbook contiene una transcripción completa de la conversación, listas de vocabulario, notas culturales y la clase. Lo puedes descargar de forma instantánea desde Inglés.fm. Nos vemos.